Hello, and welcome back to Suzerain with the Republic of Swordland. In today's episode, well, it looks like the Alliance of Nations Assembly is coming up. But what happened last time? The heartbreak for FC America as Real Mountain Claw secures a dominant 2-0 victory in Mercopen Cup knockout. In a highly anticipated Mercopen Cup knockout match, FC America faced a formidable challenge from Real Monteclar, and sadly their dreams of advancing further in the prestigious tournament was shattered. The match ended with a convincing 2-0 victory for Real Monteclar, leaving the American fans crestfallen. The encounter started with a swift blow from Real Monteclar as they swiftly found the net to take an early lead. FC America tried valiantly to stage a comeback, and their celebrated striker Hakan Zalartar almost provided a glimmer of hope with a potential equalizing goal. However, the referee's controversial decision deemed the effort offside, dashing the American hopes. Despite FC America's relentless efforts, Real Monteclar defense stood firm, thwarting every attack. In a pivotal moment in the late game, Real Monteclar star Alfredo Inzama stole the spotlight by scoring a powerful goal, solidifying their victory. Despite the heartbreak, FC America's journey to Mercopen Cup was nothing short of inspiring. They captured the nation's imagination with their exceptional performances and united the country behind their footballing prowess. President Rain conveyed his unwavering support and admiration for the team after the match. Woo! Let's go! I'm proud of them. And I bet they'll make it next year. David Whiskey and the rest of the Swordish delegation to the Alliance of Nation. Oh no, I and David Whiskey. It's not David Whiskey talking. Never mind. And the rest of the Swordish delegation to the Alliance of Nations arrived in Quebec. The local police escorted us to the Alliance's headquarters in downtown, Constantine, immediately recognizable by its gleaming dome. On entering the building, we were met by a parliamentary guide who briefed us about the procedures. After a strict security screening, the staff ushered us in the third floor. We entered the massive circular assembly hall and took our designated seats. David sat next to me. All of the world's most powerful people under one gleaming dome. I'm glad to be among them. Everyone's words and actions here will change the world for better or worse. How are you feeling, Anton? Ever since what happened to Peter, I'm amazed you've been holding up so well. I remember how inseparable you two were in university. I managed, somehow. It is tough to be president, making harsh decisions and dealing with their consequences. I wish I could have supported you more, but time has been a cruel mistress. For what it's worth, I appreciate the advice you've given me. Thank you, Anton. From a distance, we could see the President of the General Assembly, Mr. Nines, approaching its designated position. Well, the session is about to start. Let's get comfortable. It's going to be a long day. Yeah, it will be. Mr. Nines opened the session with a short speech and called the first speaker to the floor. It is my grand pleasure to invite the Prime Minister of Lesbia to address the Assembly. Patricio Alvarez stood and walked up to the podium as the Assembly applauded. Mr. President, it is my pleasure to return to this podium. David leaned in and spoke in a low voice. Let's see how crazy this year's session will get. Let's see. When I last spoke here, the message I gave was encouragement and support to this organization and its vital role it plays. Of all the challenges Eastern Mercopa and the whole world has faced since then, one has grown larger and more imminent than any other. The threat of so-called socialist states and the actions taken by their authoritarian rulers with no regard to international law. A loud noise came from the table of Vagzlin. I saw Emmerich Hegel pounding his fist on the table in protest. Looks like the Chancellor's already mad. David nodded. Today I need to come together as the leaders. The need to come together as the leaders of the free world is more important than ever. The CSP, under The leadership of United Cortana has been fueling Vagsland's military-industrial complex and expansionist aims in eastern Recopa. The world cannot turn a blind eye to the increasing naval presence of Vagsland in Marquian Sea. We hereby call for immediate withdrawal of all naval vessels with all offensive capabilities from international waters. I mean, I like that. That sounds great. A lot of noise came from the assembly hall in response. Most of Western Recopan delegates were clapping, while others either shouted in protest or sat in stony silence. Let us also not forget about the recent events that transpired on another state with socialist teachings, a state that wages war against its own citizens. Wellen. He has a point. David nodded intently. Their purge of the minorities in their country was again largely ignored by the international community. I would go as far to call it genocide. Yeah, I feel bad for kind of being part of that whole thing, but you know, it happened. It's it's in the past, you know. Yeah. Well, and violently violated our past treaties and mobilized their armed forces, deploying them close to our borders and authorizing them to partake in massacres. Lesbia was affected not only by the large wave of refugees coming from Wellen, but by the subsequent government seizure of all of our companies that were active in the country. We hereby call the member states to action against Wellen and its rogue government. Thank you. I'm gonna clap. I clapped. We walked back to his seat amidst enthusiastic applause from most of the Marquian delegates. President Nines waited for the noise to calm down and invited the next speaker, the president of Wellen, Victor Smollett. Smollett stood up as he walked past Patricio Alvarez. He brushed him aside with an exaggerated sweep of his arms. When he reached the podium, he fumbled with the microphone for a few seconds. Then he smiled as Alvarez mockingly as he raised the height of it. I think the real chaos will start now. Let's hope not. Victor turned to President Nines and bowed slightly. Mr. President. He then turned back at us and stared out into the hall for a few seconds. Fellow delegates, it is true that the world today faces a multitude of challenges. In the midst of these challenges, the world's most powerful leaders gather in Kairat. And what do? They make threats, promote hate, and spread lies. In this, the alliance of nations we all want, where the cooperation and friendship, where this unity. I want to remind you of the wars that the West fought on our soil, of the foreign troops who occupied our country and seized our valuable resources. I want to remind you how they stole the oil from our sacred soil, and they did not know when to stop. The ATO's soldiers left, but their interference never ceased. They financed armed rebel groups whose only purpose to create terror inside our country. So, fellow delegates, don't you dare speak about Llewellyn before you acknowledge your involvement in our own civil war, before you acknowledge your own dark past. He's not entirely wrong. It's true that the Western powers had their hands in the Wellen Civil War, but it doesn't justify the operation. Sorry, you already know my take on dealing with him. Well, yeah, so far talking to you, I've just said, well, both sides at a point, so, cool. As well as known, after the tremendous tragedy of the Wellen Civil War, Acacia made a deal with United Cortana, where they agreed upon the withdrawal of their troops, along with the removal of half of our army. Not only did they weaken us, we were left alone in facing the genocidal British Freedom Front, which ATO funds together with Rumberg. I will show you some of the evidence of foreign interference. He picked up a large stack of paper and waved them back and forth. I have clear evidence of direct aid from Rumberg to the British Freedom Front. They smuggled tons of K-74s in Wellen. They smuggled in their spies, smuggled in mercenary commanders. I'm just gonna keep listening. I kept listening. These documents will be published everywhere. Copies have already been sent to the Investigative Affairs of Alliance of Nations. I expect the organization to do its task and investigate this properly instead of leaving Welland behind as they always have. Coming back to the claims of the lesbian representative, first, there's no evidence of civilian massacres of the Wessex forces, nor so-called purges of minorities. Second, the operation was limited only to militant BFF, not the Bloods in general. Third, we know your government is also implicit in funding the BFF, and that your oil companies aided their militants during the operation. Fourth, as the state, we only took what was ours. The companies then the delegates spoke of were not only aiding the militants, they were brought to the Welland by force. Know that Welland will no longer recognize the right of any other country to determine what type of weapons we are permitted to possess, or what type of policies we follow within our borders. Welland stands stronger and more united than ever. Our people have spoken. The enemies inside our borders are crushed. Now I ask every delegate here to read our report on the connections of the West with the armed militants in Eastern Europa, and I ask the Alliance of Nations to do what's right. One only wants peace. Our people want peace. They are counting on the support and understanding of all the nations of the world. Their proclamation is free Welland or death. The assembly roared with particularly loud applause coming from the seats of the Rican nations. Woo, yeah! He seems to be popular with Rika, doesn't he? Well, he played a victim here pretty strongly, and his anti-imperialist stance has definitely earned him sympathy from Ricans. Most of that continent has still not achieved stability after gaining independence from colonial suzerains. Easy to forget, it has only been a few years since the revolutions. Victor slowly walked to his seat as he applauded himself. He saluted the Rican delegates as he passed them. I always salute when that says, and you guys can't see it, but I do. So, yeah. Next, President Nines invited Martin Van Houten to the podium. He walked up to the microphone with quick steps. He was frowning and clenching his fists. I could almost see his jaw trembling. Seems like Martin is not in the mood. Can you blame him? His navy is being harassed by Vagslan every day now. Mr. President, fellow delegates of the Assembly and friends, it is an honor to be with you today. I wish we could meet under different circumstances. Once again, the CSP and in particular Vagslan have shown us what they're willing to do to achieve their political aims. I must first thank to the delegates from Swordland for being brave enough to recognize our hegeland when the rest of the world left us alone. We were one of the first countries to propose proper cooperation among Eastern European nations. Yet when we were threatened by Vagslan expansion, no one came to our side. Except for us, baby! Although Mr. Alvarez voiced his indirect support for us earlier in today's session, I can't keep myself from wondering where he was when our fleets were under attack by the very socialists he spoke of. So here I am, asking for the support of the fellow member states of the Alliance of Nations. Magnolia is under attack by Vagsland. A loud banging voice emerged from the table of Vagslandian delegates. All of them were pounding their fists on their table. Those delegates need to learn some respect. That's for sure. Mr. President, please moderate the assembly. This is more than disrespectful. Emmerich Hegel began shouting curses at Nines repeatedly, banged his gavel for order. Order! Order! After a minute of back and forth shouting, the noise settled and Nines allowed Martin to continue. As you know, our drilling ships, oil tankers, and even fishing vessels have been disappearing in the Myrian Sea, captured or sunk by Vagslan. Just ignore it. And the Vagslandian fleet is patrolling the seas around Hegeland with complete disregard to international laws. I call on the Alliance of Nations to find a resolution to the never-ending conflict that Vagslan created. We demand the immediate withdrawal of all naval forces from our territorial waters. Malleus terror surrounds us on all sides. I call the democratic rule to action against the tyrant of Mallevism, authoritism, militarism, and extremism. The banging noise started again. Hegel stood up and approached the rostrum. You are a spineless jerk, a lackey of Arcadian imperialism. President Nines called for silence and started hitting the gavel. Order! Order! Yeah, I'm gonna speak up in support of Van Houten. I stood up. Have some respect, Mr. Hegel. You have no right to intervene! Know your place, President Rain! President Ryan smacked his gavel in vain as a shouting match broke out in the assembly. Finally, after a few minutes, the other Vagslandian delegates convinced Hegel to sit back down. I believe I don't need to speak more about this subject. Everything is clear as day. Mr. Hegel's actions speak volumes about the reality of Vagsland and their corrupted ideology. I hope to see this conflict resolved with the help of the Alliance of Nations soon. Yeah, I mean, you're not doing well on yourself to look good. Sorry, man. Like, even if you were the good side of this, you're not making it look like it. So, that's on you. He quickly left the podium and nodded to the other Agnolian delegate. The two left the assembly hall. President Nines announced the next speaker, Emmerich Hegel. Hegel immediately took his bake and spoke in a low, seething tone. Thank you. David, buckle up. It's the Chancellor's time now. It looks like you're having fun, Mr. President. First of all, I want to extend a due welcome to the new states from Rica that have joined this organization. After fighting for years against colonialism and imperialism, they more than earned our membership vote. I am overjoyed to see them finally represented in the Assembly. As our numbers grow and more states are represented in this stage, we come ever closer to finding resolutions to the conflicts that plague us. For hundreds of years, the dominant economics of Mercopa raised, pillaged, and exploited the continents of Rica and Sila. Sadly, Vagsland was also a part of this plunder in the years before the revolution, when it still clung to the idea of imperialism. But when our masses found their voice, the old colonial powers and their new financiers turned against them. Those powers did whatever they could to hamper our revolutions. They did not want the people to be heard. They are scared of us for showing the possibility of a better path. Of course, they don't want us to succeed. We threaten the productivity that runs on the blood and sweat of their working class. And now they have started labeling us the aggressors. Yet we all know it was the Arcatians who bid up the military bases across Mercopa. It was the ADO that was the first formed to fight against Malunism. He's exaggerating. Do you think so? He's not entirely wrong. I mean, if I had an option to say he's not entirely wrong, I would have said it. My options were like, he's completely right and he's exaggerating. I needed a middle ground option. Ugh, this voice is hurting my throat. Vagsland holds the right to protect its territorial waters and trade from France. The delegates from Lesbia and Agnolia brought up the Filico Treaty. But what were they doing when ADO forces patrolled the Antician Sea? They were silent. And what about Hedgeland? How about the Vags being killed by the Agnolian government because they protested against an appointed governor? Agnolia and their allies in Sword have no right to claim they're upholding liberty and democracy. Other nations have no right to intervene in matters between Agnolia and Vagsland. Just as no country in the world has the right to determine what type of naval vessel we use, no country can force us not to defend our seas. If there's a conflict the Alliance can resolve, let's start with the Arcatian base on Ravnos Island. Lesbia has been housing Arcatian troops and missiles by our border for years, and none of the member states even talked about it. I also want the member states to look into Arcatian bases, both Lesbia and Swordsland. Now, if the Alliance Nation truly claims to have the people's best interests at heart, they cannot stay silent about the Agnolian government did in Hedgeland, how they took away the rights of our people. Perhaps then they can be proper dialogue between our nations, and the Alliance of Nations can finally demonstrate that it can serve its intended purpose. But unfortunately, the Alliance of Nations remains all too willing to overlook such human rights violations. However, the Vagslandian government is ready, as always, to fight the forces of oppression and colonial servitude on behalf of our free people. Oh, I lost the voice completely. He raised his left fist. Iraq Veskar! Was that Swordish? Did I catch that right? He said the revolution... He said the revolution will come, yes. But it was an old Vagish. Very similar to Swordish, right? Some words are even written the same way. And I'm surprised you caught that from his accent. My accent of his was horrible, so... Most of the delegates from Xeno, Rica, and Cortana responded with thunderous applause. Woo! Yeah! Hegel shook hands with them as he walked back to his seat. President 9 announced the next speaker, Queen Beatrice Livingston. Dear President of the Assembly, dear delegates, dear leaders of the world, just as my fellow Eastern Mercopan delegates spoke about the troubles plaguing our continent, I also have to bring attention to the plight of the people of the North. The Alliance of Nations, the ATO, the CSP, and even the OMEC have never supported our people when they've been through tragic atrocities. Like many of the Western countries, here we never received financial aid when natural disasters shook our lands. The pain of people was never recognized, not even when they faced the threat of genocide by the hands of the Swordfish kings. In light of all that, I implore this alliance to take a closer look at the actions of our southern neighbor. They took in traitors and gave them protection. Their president even went so far as to blame our country for spying on his administration through his own private secretary, and he expects the world to believe his lies. I'm gonna keep listening. It's better to wait my turn. Swordland closed their borders to innocent Bloodish people fleeing from being massacred by Wessex forces. They even supported and cooperated with Welland in their ethnic war against the Bloodish people. I hereby invite all of you to determine the initiation of a proper intergovernment investigation into Swordland. If the Alliance continues to shrink its given duties, you can trust in Rumburg to take matters into her own hands. It is also important to point out that Rumburg will not stand idly by if more Acacian military are transferred to Eastern Mercopa. I hereby condemn both ATO and Swordland for allowing Arcacia to be settled in our region. Before I finish, I also want to say, Mr. Smolik, I'm looking forward to reading your report. I wonder what the so-called evidence is all about. Know that your slander does not work on us. Know that we are ready to die for our freedom. Know that our kingdom stands firm and strong. Expect a grand awakening. Thank you. Grand awakening? That sounded like a threat. She left the rostrum without getting much applause. Then President 9 spoke my name. Mr. Anton Rain, President of Swordland, I invite you to address the assembly. David immediately started clapping. Good luck, Mr. President. I walked up to the rostrum and took my place at the stodium. In front of me were some of the most powerful leaders in the entire world. I looked them in the eyes. Thank you, Mr. President, fellow delegates. Swordland remains committed to the Alliance of Nations and the ideas that gave birth to it. We must remain devoted to the dream of a peaceful and free world, a united world. Our world is faced with the dangers of divisions, the danger of large military alliances, and nuclear armed races. Today, we're confronted by a difficult choice. Our great achievements may either be used for the benefit or the detriment of mankind. Now I'd like to address some of the topics mentioned here today. We are deeply saddened by the tragic events that took place in Welland. I have to admit that the operation resulted in many unnecessary deaths. I would also like to extend my support to Mr. Van Houten. The delegate from Magnolia is correct. We can't let the CSP threaten and dominate our seas. Swordland will do whatever it takes to achieve peace in Eastern Mercopa. Edric Hegel pounded his fist on the table again. Peace? You achieved nothing! You're a puppet of Arcacia! President 9 slammed his gavel now. Don't you dare interrupt me again. You're mistaking me for my predecessors. President 9 slammed his gavel again and warned me not to respond back. Next, I would like to address the Queen of Rumburg. Swordland always wanted to have peace between our nations, yet we are being threatened by Rumburg. We wanted to be diplomatic, even when Rumburg shot down our plane. Swordland only wanted peace, not baseless accusations and threats. I hereby call on the Alliance of Nations to support Swordland. We are facing an existential threat. Thank you for listening to my concerns. I wish to see the resolution from the AN soon. We stand as always we stand, for the rights of people of Swordland and Eastern Europa, just as those in other continents. The people of Swordland and I are honored to have expressed our concerns before this noble assembly. Peace in Marcopa, peace in the world. Patricio Alvarez stood up and started applauding. Well spoken. I heard thunderous applause from half of the assembly. Thank you. I left the podium. I walked back to my seat. David did not stop applauding until I sat down. Thank you, David. It was not a bad speech, Mr. President. You did well. President Nines announced the next speaker, the White Walker. Mr. President, I first want to congratulate you on your election to the high office. Mr. Secretary, delegates to the Alliance Nations, ladies and gentlemen, fellow friends, we meet again on our quest to bring peace and light into this world. But even though some of the clouds have lifted, the world has not escaped the darkness. The Cantorian Security Pact is rapidly expanding its influence. It's very troubling to see the democratic nations of Marcopa be threatened by those Malianist powers. I refer, of course, to the presence of Vaclandian and Cortanan fleets in Marcopian Sea. They are harassing other nations and hampering international trade. Is this not an attack against world peace? An attack against the free trading nations of the world? Today, our obligations to world peace are being tested by United Cortana and the Malianist bloc. If we fail to counter this threat, if we stay idle, and allow them to surround us with their war machines and blockades, if the attackers do not face consequences, then this unstable peace we believe we had built will be the world's downfall, and posterity will point its finger at us for not stopping it. Emmerich Hegel and the other Vaglandian delegates started making noise again. This time, Hegel had taken off his shoe and was banging the table with it. There we go. I have no words. The Chancellor's gone mad. It's getting ridiculous. He's not even ashamed at his age. Despite his claims, the CSP's actions will only bring about war. Yet we still believe United Cortana and Arcacia together with their allies can come to an understanding for our mutual benefit and our desire to avoid the destruction of the world. We believe that all the people of the world must be free to choose their own future. No country, be it Arcacia or United Cortana, has the right to impose its values on others. But I will say this to the leaders of United Cortana. If either of us to be secure, we need a peaceful cooperation, not a defense system, forced blockades, or shows of naval superiority. If the Alliance of Nations cannot find a resolution to the conflict, the ATO remains ready and able to react. Hegel stood up with the shoe in his hand. What is that supposed to mean? You're promoting war in the Alliance of Nations? Mr. President, this cannot... Nine slammed the gavel down and shouted, Silence, please! Mr. Chancellor, please let me finish. We did not interrupt you when you addressed the Assembly. I must also raise my concerns about the threat of Rumburg poses in Eastern Marcopa. The speakers who preceded me clearly showed that tensions are rising. The reports from Welland and Swordland are troubling. Arcacia and the ATO will stand against the aggression of Rumburg. They are playing a dangerous game, one that may bring ruin to Marcopa and their own lands. I believe the Alliance of Nations can find a resolution to this conflict as well. If not, let it be known that Arcacia will stand together with Swordland. Rumburg cannot do it as it pleases. Do you think Rumburg can pursue any more aggressive action after that statement? I doubt that. With our membership in ATO and Arcasia's clear support, the Queen needs to be crazy to try anything. Finally, I propose that the Alliance of Nations undertake the noble cause of helping the people of the world through rewriting and properly enforcing its Human Rights Declaration. The Alliance of Nations cannot survive as a static organization. Its size and duties are increasingly enormous. It should adapt to the changing world. But peace and rights do not rest in the hands of the organization alone. They are in the hearts of our people and the spirit of cooperation between our nations. So let it be known, my fellow inhabitants of this world, let us take our stand and see if we can finally achieve a lasting peace. Thank you. Most of the assembly applauded with the speech, and the ATO delegates in particular. Stand up and applaud the speech. I stood up and applauded. The applaud continued for some time. Walker shook hands with various delegates on his way back to his seat. President Nines announced the last speaker before the break. It was Leon Melyevs. Yep. Melyev slowly walked to the rostrum in his iconic suit. All the CSP delegates stood up and applauded him. Honorable Chairman and fellow delegates to the Alliance of Nations, here we are again at the most esteemed meeting of the state representatives in the world. However, increasingly we are being threatened, disregarded, attacked, or ignored in the Assembly. The representative of Arcasia has just shown this unfriendly attitude towards us yet again. Arcasia would have you believe we are standing in the way of lasting peace, yet the peace they talk about was only possible thanks to our missiles and our growing base in the developing world. The ATO kept waging wars against people's revolutions and forcing new independent states to be their puppets, blinding them to themselves through the Arcasian lira. And now yet another Arcasian president is telling us we are the aggressors and they are the keepers of peace. We will not be silent anymore against these lies. When was this peace you talk about? Where was this cooperation between our countries? Have you ever accepted our invitation to talk about denuclearization? If you don't accept their deals, don't listen to our concerns, and keep pointing fingers at us, why did you invite us to the Alliance of Nations? Every year, United Cortana comes to the Assembly to address the real problems of real people. People who suffer because of your systems, your wars, and your ignorance. Whether you like it or not, we'll keep representing the laborers, the slaves, the oppressed of this world. And believe it or disregard it, history is on our side. We say to the representatives of capitalist countries, come and visit us. Come and see the revolutionary workings in Cortana. Show our continent to your people without distorting the reality. If you cannot do this, then you do not need to come. We believe socialism will triumph over capitalism in the end. Such is the logical conclusion of the development of humankind. And this time, lesbian delegates started laughing very loudly. Some of their delegates booed. Boo! Boo! I'm just gonna keep watching. That's unprofessional of all of them. You can keep laughing, gentlemen. Communism will bury you. Suddenly the laughter turning and shouting, no! How dare you! Boo! 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 If you believe in cooperation, we'll be waiting. We're not going anywhere. However, the ATO keeps intervening in our matters. It is natural that the CSP would react. Despite threats from the ATO, Rumberg, or any other nation of the organization, we must not succumb to further division and violence. We must ask ourselves, what do the people of our country expect of us? They surely don't want war and bloodshed. So let us leave our children and grandchildren good memories of our time and a better future for all. Let them look at history and say, once there were great divisions and complex problems, but the leaders of the world came together and the Alliance Nations succeeded in settling them in order to ensure our peaceful lives. Let us act in such a way to make this session not a session of threats, but a session of hopes and the realization of them. The government of United Cortana and United Peoples Cortana are ready to serve their duties for world peace. Long live the People's Revolution. Honestly, I'm going to applaud his speech. The assembly broke into a massive applause. The applause continued for some time. Melyev slowly walked back to his seat as the president announced a break. That was a lot. Yeah, it definitely was. It's quite scary, to be honest. We need to be careful. We walked out of the hall to have some lunch and fresh air. Woo! Well, there we go. But for now, this is a good time to go ahead and end this episode. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell button. And as always, peace.